sacred stones. Oh, sacred stones. I come here seeking wisdom and enlightenment. Today marks the completion of my 50th revolution around the sun. What can I learn from my past to help me in my future? Won't you show me a sign and give me something? "1971. Hmm? Oh, now I understand. I've got to make another video."
Greetings, fans of early 70s progressive rock and heavy rock. This is Peter Scope for Music is a Journey, episode 38. Today's topic, well, you can probably guess by the title of the video, this is albums from 1971. Albums that turned 50 this year. Now, I know that recently there are a lot of videos coming out, people doing videos about albums that turned 50 this year. However, I'm doing this video for a kind of particularly special reason. It's because somebody around here has turned 50 this year already. There's nobody else here but me. So, yes, that's right. I'm the one that has turned 50, in fact, just a few days ago as of this recording. So I thought earlier on in January, why not take a look at some albums that will turn 50 with me this year? And of course, then when I turned on YouTube later on, I suddenly found all these other videos coming out with albums that turned 50. But I'm going to do albums from my collection, so maybe in that way it's going to be a little bit different. Okay, so 1971, what a brilliant year for music. In fact, I would say that from 1969 to about 72, 73 was probably some of the best years in music. And 1971 lands smack right in the middle of it. We had, of course, a lot of famous artists releasing albums like the Rolling Stones, Rod Stewart, Elton John, Janis Joplin, Carole King came out with her solo album. There were a lot, and in fact, if you take a look at any list of the top albums of 1971, you'll probably recognize a lot of them, if not all. There were also a lot of artists who released 2 albums in 1971, such as Yes, Uriah Heep, Grand Funk Railroad, Blood Rock, and several others. So it was really a fantastic year for music. Of course, some of the albums released in 1971 were a particular group's or artist's best album, and sometimes it was their second or third best album, with their best album coming in 1972. So it seems that 1971 certainly is a contender for one of the best years in rock music, especially at least at that time. Okay, so to prepare for my list, I first of all thought about what albums I have that are of 1971, and then just to make sure I didn't forget any, I went ahead and checked digitaldreamdoor.com's list of 100 top albums for 1971. There were a lot I didn't know about. And then I went ahead and checked Prog Archive's top 100 albums for 1971. Man, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about, and some of it I checked out, and some of it I decided I had to order. Then I also went and checked the big one, Rate Your Music's list of 1,000 albums of 1971. I confess that at the time of this recording, I have not checked all. I've gone up to 800 and checked the last page, page 25, which was actually done on a whim, and it turned out there was an album, 975, that I had, so I thought I should check all of them. I've been checking out a lot of stuff too. If it said acid rock, psychedelic rock, heavy psychedelic rock, heavy blues or hard rock or progressive rock. In a lot of cases, I went ahead and checked it out, and man, there's a lot of like heavy distorted guitar music, some of it more boogie rock, some of it blues, some of it that kind of symphonic prog with the distorted guitar, but also the fiddly diddly organ works and so on. And there's also actually a lot of jazz stuff out there too. There were a lot of jazz fusion albums coming out around that time, so it's a really interesting period. And of course, there was a lot of weird experimental stuff. Some albums like Faust, for example, or Brain Ticket, I went ahead to check out those since they were in the tops of the lists. And it was like, wow, okay, I think it's a little over my head. So I didn't get those. Leaving it at that, there were a lot that actually I did have interest in. And if it was possible, if it was reasonable to order, I did. Alright, so originally when I went over my CDs, I had about 46 from 1971. I have added a few to it. Some of them have already arrived. They will be in this video here, which is part 1. And if any of the other ones arrive late, they're going to be in part 2, and hopefully I will have all of them by that time. So what I've decided to do is divide it into releases from January to June, which we will talk about in this video here. And then in the next video, I'll talk about releases from July to December. As well, there were a number of albums where I could not find a release date or release month. They just said 1971, so we will talk about those ones at the very end. Okay, so now let's get on with the albums I have from January to June. Alright, let's get started. So first of all, coming out on January 3rd of 1971, this is Uriah Heep's second album, Salisbury. Of course, it came out on January 3rd, so the whole thing was already written, recorded, wrapped up in 1970. So I'm not really sure if you'd think about this as a 1971 album, since it actually captures the vibe of 1970. This was my first Uriah Heep album ever. I bought it on cassette back in the 80s sometime. Looking for early heavy metal, of course, what I liked best on here was the song Time to Live, which is a pretty heavy, hard-hitting song. Of course, Bird of Prey is also really good. And actually, I quite liked The Park, which is acoustic and a little bit more, I don't know, like folky or kind of jazzy in places. But I really like that one too. And then, of course, there's the big title track, which I think is like 12 minutes long and has a full orchestra and everything. It is not an example of Uriah Heep's heaviest work, but it is an example of Uriah Heep's diversity at that time. So actually, this has always remained one of my favorites, perhaps my second favorite Uriah Heep album. Here's one I picked up recently. This is Mountain, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, released in January of 1971. I'm not exactly sure of the date. I am not a huge Mountain fan, but I decided to check out a couple of tracks, and I thought this is cool. That's good stuff. The first track, which is Don't Look Around, that is actually a pretty heavy song. And the title track, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, has become one of my recent favorite songs to listen to. It does lyrically sound like a kind of sad song. You know, a guy is going to sea to hunt whales, and he's telling his sweetheart, don't cry, and I'll be back soon. And yeah, it's pretty cool like that, except that the story behind it, it's actually dedicated to a fellow named Owen Coffin. And the story is that his crew went out to sea, and they went on a Nantucket sleigh ride, which is when you harpoon a whale, and then it takes off and just drags your boat through the water. That's what they call a Nantucket sleigh ride. And their boat got dragged out to sea, and then they got lost out at sea, and they were out there for days and days, and it came to the point where it was decided that in order for the crew to survive, one person would have to be sacrificed for food. And so they drew lots, and poor fellow Owen Coffin lost, and so he became the sustenance for the rest of the crew until they were rescued. So when you think about that, and he's saying in the song, don't cry, you know I'm coming home soon, it's like, ooh, yeah, no you're not. But anyway, really cool song, and it's got this really heavy part in it. And overall, it is a typical Mountain album with some really heavy-hitting songs, some more boogie-type songs, some more blues-type songs, but yeah, I'm actually quite pleased with it. Mountain's Nantucket Sleigh Ride. Now here's an album I've mentioned at least twice before. Once in my heavy metal hard rock of the 1970s, Canadian hard rock of the 1970s, and then once again in really awesome heavy riffs from 1969 to 71, 72. This is Dionysus. They are a band out of Quebec. They were, anyway. They started out as a heavy psychedelic rock band and later on became a progressive rock band. Their debut album here, released in January of 1971, is a pretty solid example of what was popular at the time. Heavy fuzz-tone guitar, lots of organ, some boogie, some psychedelia, but it is the last track, Agneau de Dieu, that I really love because it is not only the heaviest track on the album for the first 4 minutes, but the last 2 minutes has just this awesome doomy metal riff with heavy buzzing guitar and pounding music. It's really terrific. So I think that's the one song I just listened to over and over again, and I should actually probably listen to the rest of the album a few more times. But this is Dionysus from Quebec, Le Grand Jeu, their first album, not their first game, their first album from January 1970. So moving on to February, here we have the Yes album. This is Yes's third album, their first one with Steve Howe on guitar, one of their, I don't know, most memorable, most famous, most well-known, most greatest albums. The first two albums showed what Yes were trying to do, and kind of like, these are the ideas, this is the kind of the approach that we want. But I feel, and I think a lot of people will agree, that this is the album where, man, did it ever come together. One of my favorite, actually, one of my two favorite Yes tracks of all time, Starship Trooper, is on here. I absolutely love it. And the first one, Yours Is No Disgrace, I also love. And for that matter, Perpetual Change, hey, gotta have that one in there as well. And of course, this is the one that had, I've seen all good people turn their heads each day. So, what a brilliant album. Steve Howe's acoustic, The Clap, and then a short one here. What's it called? Adventure? Yeah, Adventure, which is also pretty cool. But what a brilliant album. I think anytime Yours Is No Disgrace or Starship Trooper comes on, it's just, I have to hear it all the way through. So there we have the Yes album. Also the last album for a while with Tony Kaye on keyboards. Alright, Cactus released their second album, One Way or Another, on February 24th of 1971. I only have this 2 CD set, which includes their first 3 albums in completion, plus a couple of extra songs, and then a few songs from their final album. Unfortunately, it's not the whole album. But anyway, One Way or Another, the title track is one of my favorites. It's an awesome hard rock song from 1971. And Cactus, they had Tim Bogart, who recently passed away, unfortunately, on bass, originally from Vanilla Fudge, and Carmen Appice, is it? I always not sure about his name. Carmen Appice. Anyway, on drums, also from Vanilla Fudge. Rusty Day on vocals. He was sadly shot some years later. And I'm sorry, I forget who the guitarist is, but basically a blues-based rock band, sometimes a bit hard rock, and then occasionally a bit of proto-metal in there as well. But yeah, pretty good, solid, fun outfit, Cactus. So One Way or Another was the second album by them, released in February. Now, I don't have a date on this, but released in February is Egg's second album, The Polite Force. And I bought this because I was really exploring classic progressive rock several years ago and just trying to pick up a lot of stuff that could be interesting. And I really liked A Visit to Newport Hospital, the opening track. I think it's exactly the type of Egg song that I can listen to and enjoy without thinking it's weird or strange. Because on side 2, all this long piece, number 3, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, some of those parts are kind of weird. And then one song called Boilk, I don't know, is that boiled milk? Boilk, is also kind of more experimental piece with, I can't remember, I haven't listened to it for a while. But anyway, Eggs, The Polite Force, I'm keeping this one. I think it's an interesting album to have. Okay, then here's one I picked up recently when I started looking at the lists of top albums from 1971, and there was a lot of so-called krautrock albums. I think it's a strange name to call a subgenre of music, but anyway, basically the German approach to progressive rock or experimental rock. And can, their album Tagomago came up, and I've sampled Can stuff before and thought, nah. But there was something about this one I thought, okay, let's check it out. And quite honestly, except for 2 songs, I think, or 2 tracks, I think this is actually a really enjoyable album. And I'm quite surprised by one track called Mushroom. I read someone said it doesn't sound like 1971. It's more like some post-punk effort from the early 80s. And I have to agree, it definitely sounds like something you could have heard, possibly an underground punk, post-punk thing in the early 80s, or maybe even in the early 90s, an underground type thing. There are 2 tracks on here. One is called Aum, and the other one Peking O. Experimental. Some parts are interesting, some parts are cool, some parts it's like, oh, what are you doing? Especially vocalist Damo Suzuki. In Peking O, there's one part, it's just like, man, you sound like you're freaking out on something. Maybe he was, I don't know, or he's just going nuts in the studio, or not the studio, they were in some farmhouse somewhere. But anyway, Can's Tagomago, and I have to say, actually, like I said, I'm enjoying this album. I'm glad I got it. It's cool. So we're going to move on to March of 1971, and let's see, the release date is March 1st. This is Humble Pie, Rock On. I think this was their 4th album then. Safe as Yesterday, Town and Country, self-titled, and Rock On. Their follow-up album to this, Smokin', is one of their, actually more well-known than this one, but I had that on cassette before, so I thought, let's get this one on CD and see how it sounds. And yeah, I gotta admit that Humble Pie is not exactly my style of rock. It's a little bit too blues and boogie for my taste. But there are some tracks that have got some good heavy riffs or some good fuzz tone guitar or distorted guitar and some good power to it. And of course, Humble Pie was basically the first band to be called a heavy metal leaden shit rock band. And their other album to be called 27th Rate Heavy Metal Crap by Mike Saunders in his reviews for Cream magazine back in 1970. So yeah, Humble Pie do have that position. And even I said in another video, an article about Steve Marriott also mentioned heavy metal in there as well about Steve Marriott's music. So back at that time, Humble Pie were included in the early 70s first wave of heavy metal mix. Anyway, Humble Pie, Rock On. All right, so I have this for March 19th. This is Jethro Tull's Aqualung. This is the 40th anniversary. I had the 20th anniversary on CD, and I had the cassette in the 1980s. A girl in one of my classes who played flute said that I would like Jethro Tull because they're like a hard rock band, but they have flute. And I wasn't so quick to pick up on it, but I heard Aqualung, the song, on the radio, and I thought, you know what, that sounds pretty cool, so I'm getting it. And I wouldn't say I'm in love with the whole album, but there are just some tracks on here, basically all of side 1. Yeah, like Aqualung, Cross-Eyed Mary, Cheap Day Return, Mother Goose, Wondering Aloud. Those 5 tracks I can just listen to straight through, all 5 of them. I love them all. And Wondering Aloud, just one of those faves of mine. And side 2 has a lot of interesting stuff too. Of course, Locomotive Breath. And I think it's the one called My God, where they have this like choir and flute part in the middle. I used to listen to that a lot because I thought that was pretty cool that a rock band was doing that. I had no idea in the 1980s that Jethro Tull was progressive rock because I had no idea about progressive rock in the 80s. But there you have it. Jethro Tull's Aqualung. Among prog fans, Thick as a Brick is usually the favorite. Among Jethro Tull fans, it's often Benefit. But just in general, this is probably their most well-known album. Alright, so here's a band I actually picked up. I got a compilation of theirs some years back. This is Stray, who were a pretty solid hard rock act out of England. Also said to be boogie rock as well as underground progressive. I'm not sure exactly how much progressive you would say they were, but they're certainly a hard rock and boogie rock band with some of the earlier stuff being closer to, I'd say, the heavy metal side. And on here, for example, the song Jericho, I think that could be classified as first wave of heavy metal, not just hard rock. Suicide is more like a kind of groovy heavy song, the title track here. Yeah, I just got this a few days ago and I've listened to it once all the way through. 3 tracks I already knew from the compilation, but I'm really impressed. This is a good, solid, distorted guitar, heavy guitar album from 1971, Stray's second album, Suicide. Alright, now here is a... Maybe I should check this out just to add some color to my CD collection purchase. This is Nucleus, their first album, Elastic Rock from 1970, and we'll talk about it later, from 1971, released in March. This is a band of jazz musicians who said, we want to make a band, but we don't want to make it like a typical jazz band, so let's put a rock backbone to it. And so they've got the jazzy drums, but they also have the kind of more aggressive approach of rock at that time. And honestly, their second album, there are some tracks on here, that's what made me buy the album, because they have this growly guitar effect, growly guitar notes mixed in with saxophone, alto sax, tenor sax, I'm not sure, trumpet, and so on. So you've got these jazzy things alongside this kind of more like a steady rock beat and rock bass and growly guitar at times. But of course, it is, I'd say, way more jazz than rock, but definitely interesting. And for me, more interesting than a lot of other jazz rock stuff out there, like Frank Zappa's Hot Rats or Soft Machine, which I never really got into. So anyway, Nucleus, this album here, we'll talk about it later, from March of 1971, I think is interesting. Now here's a band I should have known about. This is Culpeper's Orchard, a band from Denmark with an Englishman as their lead vocalist. And the Englishman was actually more into the folk scene. He was very much a folk artist, hung out with other folk artists and so on. But he went to Denmark, he was living in Copenhagen, and someone said, we're trying to put together a rock band, so would you like to be in it? And their first album, it is a really cool album. It's very much like a Jethro Tull album. You've got the heavy guitars, distorted guitars, the solos and so on, but you also have these tracks with a lot of acoustic guitar, the softer side, and a couple of times you might get some flute, and as well, the vocals in a couple of songs actually do sound very similar to Ian Anderson. So this is very similar. If you like Jethro Tull, you'll probably like Culpeper's Orchard. This is a CD set of all three of their albums, plus some single B-sides or something like that. They said in the liner notes that their second and third album, they moved away from the heavy rock sound, hard rock sound, and went more into the folk sound. But there are still some really cool songs with the electric guitar and the rock approach on the second album and even on the third album. And to be fair, I actually like a lot of the softer folk acoustic stuff. I think, for me, folk is more enjoyable than jazz. That's me. But anyway, so yeah, I am really impressed with this band. I'm very glad it was available on CD, and I have it now. Haha. Hey, let's move on to April. So, what I have here, released April 5th, Flower Traveling Band, Satori. This album is a fairly well-known album for, I guess, it's a well-known obscure album of early 70s heavy rock. Flower Traveling Band, I think not only them but other Japanese rock bands really picked up on the Black Sabbath sound, because there is some really cool doomy riffs in the opening track, Satori 1. The rest of the album, again, I've only listened to it a couple of times. There are some more experimental weird things and some other heavy things. I think Satori 5 is also pretty good. The vocalist, I think he was half Japanese, half American, if I remember correctly. Sometimes he's really good and powerful, and sometimes it's just a little bit like nails on the chalkboard. But anyway, Flower Traveling Band, Satori. I'm going to talk about them later, Blues Creation, and another band I recently found out about called Too Much. These three, anyway, really show that early 70s Japanese artists picked up on the heavy sounds of Black Sabbath, I think, and it shows through in the music, so some really cool stuff there. Okay, moving along to April 8th, 1971, Caravan in the Land of Grey and Pink. Caravan is probably not a band I'd normally gravitate to. However, I picked up this one because it appeared in Stephen Lamb's book of his recommendation for prog albums that you should get. And I agreed with most of his picks, so I thought I should probably check out some of the ones that I'm not sure about. I got this. And you know what? Actually, I rather like it, and I think it's because I like Hatfield and the North's Rotterdam Club album. Not the whole thing, but just some songs have this uniqueness to them that you will not find anybody else doing. And of course, forgot his name suddenly, but anyway, that dude who does the songwriting and vocals, he's on here too. Man, I hate that when I suddenly forget someone's name. But yeah, just a lot of really fun songs. I think the lyrics just have this kind of offhanded storytelling approach to them that don't seem like normal song lyrics, especially Golf Girl, just as an example. But yeah, Caravan, don't love the whole thing, but it's good enough. I'm keeping it. I'm going to listen to it again. Then April 30th, we have the debut album by Thin Lizzy. What can I say? Like, this was the original Thin Lizzy lineup. It changed. I don't know when. It was their second, third, or fourth album, but somewhere along the way, the original guitarist left. They brought in a new guitarist. Then they later on brought in one more guitarist, and they became the famous, basically hard rock band, blues and hard rock band that they became. But this first album is really interesting. There's a lot of peculiar stuff, like very British type songwriting styles and very interesting music that you probably will only find around this time in history. But of course they also have some of the more kind of heavy psychedelic and distorted guitar and guitar solo type songs on here. This also comes with a bunch of additional bonus tracks as well as some overdubbed and remixed versions of songs. So it's, yeah, there's 10 tracks on the original album and 19 tracks in total on this CD. So anyway, Thin Lizzy's debut. And I decided to get it after I watched a documentary on YouTube about Thin Lizzy, and I thought, let's hear what they sounded like in the beginning. Well, interesting. Moving on to May. So here's a fellow I never listened to before, Rory Gallagher. Heard him a little bit in Taste. So when I found out this is when he left Taste and started his solo career, or Taste broke up, whatever, and this was his first solo album, I thought, okay, well, let's give it a bit of a listen. Yeah, maybe it's cool, so I'll get it. And I was hoping to find some of the more heavier rock tracks rather than blues or boogie stuff. With the electric guitar, though, it's not really all that heavy. However, some of the acoustic guitar songs and the lighter songs I think are actually really good. I'm enjoying them. So I've only heard the album through once. I just got it a few days ago. But I'd say, yeah, Rory Gallagher, debut album, self-titled. It's all right. It's all right. I like it. Yeah, I know there are Rory Gallagher fans out there going, what? The guy's a genius. I know. I'm new to the fold here, right? Okay, but an album or a band that I have talked about before that I like, Mayblitz. Their second album, released in May. It's called The 2nd of May. I don't know if it was released on the 2nd of May. Mayblitz was a power trio based out of England, but with 2 Canadians in the band. Yay. And what I really love about this album are the first 2 tracks. I'm trying to remember what the first one was called now. For Madmen Only, which just starts off with this ba-dum, 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 bass and drums, and then brrr, distorted heavy guitar. The guitar solo gets a little bit sloppy in a couple of places, but it is basically a really aggressive, heavy song. And then the second track, Snakes and Ladders, I love it. The first 2 minutes is this like dun 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 dun, kind of like, you know, laid back, easy grooving feel, and then it just switches over to this really heavy doom metal riff, which I just love, and all these like sound effects of distortion and feedback. It's brilliant. So actually, I played a short sample of it in my video last year about early heavy riffs of the early 70s. But anyway, Snakes and Ladders if you want to check it out. Mayblitz. All right. Okay, so here is Rate Your Music's album number 975, I believe it was. This is Mops, which started out as a garage rock band in Japan in the 60s, and then in the early 70s they went over to this more hard rock, acoustic rock, and I forget what else is on here. Their opening track, the title track of this album, Injanaika, it is just a great hard rock, fun hard rock song. And there are a couple of other songs on here too that bring out the heavier guitar sound. But there are also some lighter ones, acoustic ones, and whatever. But anyway, I thought that title track was good enough, and this album is interesting. Mops injanai ka? Which basically means, yeah, that's alright, isn't it? Kind of like that. Wow, okay, we are over in June now, so that means only a few more albums before the end of this video. This is a band out of Quebec called Sex. Their first album, self-titled in 1970, really good, heavy rock, a little bit jazzy flavored, a little bit bluesy flavored album. Their second album in 71, June of 71, The End of My Life, was a concept album and beginning to explore more into the progressive side. Honestly, I don't really get this album. It is a story about a guy who gets a sexually promiscuous guy who gets syphilis or something like that, and eventually he's going to die. So his promiscuous life causes an early end to his life, and this is his story. There's some flute and some other stuff in here, but I prefer the heavier stuff on their debut. But anyway, The End of My Life by Sex, released in June 1971. And of course, if you're talking about really big albums of 71 and you're into prog, this is one of the most important ones. Probably Emerson, Lake and Palmer's most highly rated album, I believe. Tarkus, I think it's their third album, second studio album. But of course, side-long piece, broken into many parts, but all put together nicely. The song Tarkus, which I think is actually a really great side-long piece. If you talk about side-long tracks in the early 70s, I think I would probably place it in the top 3, along with Close to the Edge and Supper's Ready. But anyway, there it is, Tarkus. Side 2 has a variety of shorter tracks. Most of them, I think, are really good. The last one, Are You Ready, Eddie? Well, kind of a fun, let's close the album with this fun kind of track. But Bitches Crystal, The Only Way, Infinite Space, A Time and a Place, love those. Tarkus by ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Classic. Oh, and Tarkus was released on June 14th, as far as I could tell. And also released on June 14th, but didn't really go very far. Possessed. Yeah, right? You've got your 80s band Possessed, who one of the forerunners of death metal. But here we have Possessed from 1971. Now, the interesting thing about Possessed is that what was his name now? I should have checked this before, but his name is Vernon Pereira. He originally played in Band of Joy with Robert Plant and John Bonham. Then later on he formed his own band, and in 1971 they released this album. I don't know if they recorded it and it was never released, or it was released and just didn't really go anywhere, but since I have June 14th as a release date, I guess that's it. This is called Exploration. The band was named Possessed because they thought of being possessed by music, because they were so into music. Anyway, the band had a kind of tragic ending. The album never went anywhere. They continued playing for a few years, and then one day they had this, highway accident in their van, which killed 2 of the members, including Vernon Pereira. And there was even talk about John Bonham and Robert Plant doing a kind of benefit concert with the old Band of Joy members, but I think it didn't actually happen. But anyway, that's Possessed Exploration. Honestly, I bought this as a proto-metal album, and it's not really all that heavy. Some people say it's also like an early progressive album. I don't really think so. And also, I really don't like the vocals on this. And there have been many times I thought, I think it's time to part ways with this album. However, for this video here, 1971 albums, I thought, what the heck, let's at least put it in for that. Okay. And hey, that the band is called Possessed is kind of cool, I think. Alright, couple more. June 15th. This is Lighthouse. This is not the original cover. This is a Roger Dean artwork thing. The original cover had like some castle and the sun and... Well, here, I'll find it and put it here so you can see. This is a Canadian band. I think they started out with 13 members, and then by this album, I think it's their second one, they were down to 11 members. This is a band, kind of like the Blood, Sweat and Tears thing. You've got the usual rock band, guitars, organs, bass and drums, vocals, and then you've got sax and trumpets and trombones. So really big outfit here. Lighthouse, they have a song on here called One Fine Morning, which was their big hit off of here. And there was actually a similar band called Crowbar that had a song called What a Rush. Both bands were like these, big monster bands with like a dozen members or so. Anyway, it's not exactly my taste, but there's some stuff on here that I rather like. There's some pretty cool trumpet playing in Love of a Woman on track 1, trying to get as high as possible. Yeah, I guess, if you like things like Chicago or Blood, Sweat, and Tears, then probably Lighthouse is a good band for you to check out. All right, one more I have from June of 1970. This is 71. This is Budgie's debut album. Budgie, a band from Wales, power trio, who said they wanted to just play rock, like really hard and heavy rock. So yeah, it's got a lot of blues bass to it, but it also is just some really good early 70s first wave of heavy metal. And of course, famous for songs like, what the heck are they famous for now? Crash Course in Brain Surgery, Homicidal, Suicidal, songs that I think Metallica certainly covered at least one of those. Yeah, there you go. Straightforward, heavy rock from 1971, Budgie. And one interesting story was that the album artwork originally had some rider on this horse, and it was presented to Uriah Heep, and they passed on it. So Budgie said, if you change the rider's head to a Budgie's head, we'll take it. And so they did. And I think this was also a Roger Dean artwork as well. So there you go, Budgie. Okay, and that wraps up part 1 of this video here, January to June. So by the time I get around to part 2, you will see July to December, as well as albums that I couldn't find any dates for, and they're just 1971 releases. Plus there might be a couple that should have been in here that I didn't receive yet, and they're coming in the mail shortly. So watch this one, and in about a week or so I'll be back with the next one. Thanks for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you like some of the albums. Hope you maybe found something to check out. I don't know, whatever. Just spreading the word. Okay, see you in part 2.